Negative externalities are an important source of market failure. Negative externalities of production are where there are harms generated to bystanders by the production of a product. So, for example, pollution generates negative effects on bystanders. The way we can represent this with some very simple identities is we've got the marginal social costs of the production of a product of some kind, and that will be made up of the marginal private costs of production, and to that we add the external costs imposed on others. So we can see there, as long as the external costs imposed on others is some positive amount, the marginal social costs of production at some level of output will be greater than the marginal cost to the private producers of that product. When we're talking about the negative externality of consumption, here we're talking about harms that are done to bystanders due to the consumption of a product. And our example here might be littering. So the marginal social benefits associated with the consumption of a product will be made up of the marginal private benefits to the consumers of the product, but from that we have to deduct the negative external effect on bystanders. So we can see here that the marginal social benefits of the consumption of this product, which involves an externality, will be less than the marginal private benefits to the consumer of that product, whatever it happens to be, that's associated with littering. In an unregulated market, those harmed external parties, those bystanders, are invisible to the market participants, that is, the buyers and the sellers of whatever product it is we're talking about that generates an externality. Thus, the buyers and the sellers only act in accordance with their own marginal benefits and marginal costs. They ignore the external effects they're having on others, either because they're unaware of them or because they frankly just don't give a flying rat's patootie about it. Thus, we can say that the equilibrium price and quantity that are expressed in the unregulated market don't reflect these external effects. They don't take them into account. And as a result of that, the quantity that's the equilibrium quantity bought and sold will be greater than what is in fact the socially optimal quantity. That is, there will be inefficient over-allocation of resources to the production and consumption of this good, greater than what is socially optimal, represented by the Q star. Let's see what that looks like on a graph. So let's take the example of a negative externality of consumption. So we'll take it as garbage, for example. That people might, for example, people generate garbage in their houses, and let's say we take the example of people just chucking their garbage in the street or in a park. So here we have the demand for some products, whatever they are. So let's say it's milk. We've got millions of litres per month. So this is the demand for milk, and we've got the marginal cost of producing the milk. And we're going to say that there's a negative externality of consumption. So the marginal social benefit, which is made up of the marginal private benefit reflected by the demand for milk, has to be deducted the negative external effect due to the dumping of garbage, so milk cartons being just thrown out on the street or in the parks. If we did, well, here the private market comes to an equilibrium of $1, equilibrium price of $1 and the equilibrium quantity of 4 million. If we did take account of those negative externalities, we would have to decrease the demand curve. So we would have a marginal social benefit curve which would be lower than the private benefit curve, which is not taking account of the negative effects of consumption. But if we did take those into account, at least hypothetically, we'd see that we can then find what would be the socially optimal output. And this will be where the marginal social benefit equals the marginal social cost. Now this is hypothetical, it doesn't hold true in the unregulated market. But that would be at this point here. So we have a lower price and, importantly, a decrease in the quantity bought and sold, hypothetically, if those externalities were taken into account. Now, those externalities are not taken into account, so from the perspective of society as a whole, we've gone beyond the socially optimal quantity out to the quantity of 4 million beyond the socially optimal. So at this point, at this quantity, we can see that the marginal social costs, which end up here, are greater than the marginal social benefits. Since the marginal social costs with each additional unit that's being bought and sold, since those marginal social costs are greater than the marginal social benefits, we say that we're taking away from total economic welfare. Welfare here doesn't mean social security. It means like well-being or satisfaction for the society as a whole. This is kind of like at the individual level of getting to the point of the optimal quantity of pizzas to eat, where the marginal benefit, the marginal social benefit equals the marginal social cost of the last slice of pizza. And then you went on to consume more pizzas than that, so that the marginal social cost of the next slice of pizza is greater than the marginal social benefit, and you kept consuming. We would say that this is irrational behavior. Now, from the perspective of the market as a whole, this is irrational for the society, because the cost to the society of the last unit produced and consumed is greater than the benefit to the society of the last unit produced and consumed. So this area here we call a loss of economic welfare, or a loss, or what we call a deadweight loss. Let me just write that in with this pen. So here, this area here is the deadweight loss of economic welfare. Okay. We should probably get rid of that. All right, now let's look at a case of a negative externality of production. When we're talking about a negative externality of production, we have to take into account the fact that we've got the private costs of producing the product, and to those private costs we have to add the negative externalities that are borne by bystanders. We have to add those costs that bystanders experience due to the production of the product to the private costs to get the overall marginal social costs, the marginal cost to the society as a whole. Now here we have our market, our unregulated market. We can see that the in this case, the optimal output for the market, the free market. It's not really the optimal output. The free market outcome is $1 and the quantity is 4, same as before. But now we're going to say there's externalities, negative externalities of production, such as pollution from the factories. So we have to add, on top of the marginal private costs, we have to add the negative externalities. Now let's say the negative externalities get larger and larger and larger as more and more output is produced. So our marginal social cost curve will slope upwards, will have a steeper slope than the marginal private cost curve. All right, where's the optimal output from the perspective of the society as a whole? Well, that would be here, at the point where the marginal social costs equal the marginal social benefits. That would be optimal for the society. But that's not the quantity that's actually generated. The quantity that's actually bought and sold is 4 million. So the society has gone up to producing the efficient quantity, the allocatively efficient quantity, and then has, like a deranged pizza eater, has gone beyond that to produce and consume at the 4 million litre level. So the marginal social costs at 4 million are clearly greater than the marginal social benefits at 4 million. And so we can say again, there's a deadweight loss of economic welfare generated in this area here, where we're going beyond the social optimum. Now, many negative externalities are actually due to the existence of a certain kind of non-private good, which we saw in a previous video. That is, the existence of common goods, or common resources, as they're sometimes known. Pollution and littering involves the use by producers and consumers of commonly accessible air, or commonly accessible water, or commonly accessible land or space. Since others also use these, what we call commons, those others, those bystanders, are harmed by these common resources being depleted or spoilt by the producers and the consumers who utilize these commonly accessible resources. Thus, we can say that externalities are generated due to the existence of this common resource, since people can't be excluded from enjoying the benefits of a commons. They can't be excluded from using it. So there are bystanders who are harmed. So by definition, we've got externalities generated. The overuse and the depletion or the spoiling of a common resource, often a naturally occurring common resource, such as fish in the ocean or trees, something, or air quality, that's widely known. The overuse and depletion and the spoiling of them is widely known as the tragedy of the commons. And it has been, this is a term that was coined by this character here, whose name was Garrett Hardin, who was a biologist. I say was because he's dead now. Anyway, here's an example of how the tragedy of the commons would work, or not work, how it occurs. We know that fishing can be a sustainable industry because fish are not a non-renewable resource. Fish reproduce. So as long as you don't take too many fish from the ocean or the lakes or wherever, then the fish will replenish themselves, and there will always be a sufficient stock available to support an existing population of mouths who like to eat fish. Nonetheless, the fishing industry, when left unregulated, does tend to engage in overfishing. So why is that the case? Well, this is because fishers face only their own private costs, and they don't face the costs that they impose on others. That is, they don't face the cost, or they ignore or are not aware of the external costs they impose on others. So in the pursuit of their self-interest, the fishers ignore this external cost. The same story applies to if you were talking about forestry, for example, or even for clean air. It's the same sort of story applies. Since everyone can gain access to the common resource, everyone uses it according to their own self-interest, trying to maximize, for example, their own profits, and they ignore the impact that it has on bystanders, resulting in the overuse of the resource. So, for example, here we've got our price and cost of fish, and we've got the marginal social benefit of the consumption of fish, and the marginal the marginal private cost of fishing. So we've got our equilibrium in a free, unregulated market. The price of fish is $10, and the quantity of fish that are acquired is 800,000 tonnes per year. But if we took account of the external costs that are borne by others due to the overfishing, not due to overfishing, just due to fishing, then the marginal social cost would be much higher. The marginal social cost is taking account of not just the private cost, it adds on top of that. This is the externality, the external cost borne by others. It adds on top of that to give us the marginal social cost. So the equilibrium, the allocatively efficient quantity to be fished, would be at the point where the marginal social benefits equal the marginal social costs. And that's at $15 and 300 units. You should bear in mind here, just as a little side note, that this doesn't necessarily mean that we won't deplete the stocks of fish. That's possible. This is just saying that this is efficient relative with respect to the benefits to the society as a whole relative to the costs of society as a whole. Now, that allocatively efficient price and quantity is not, in an unregulated market, the price and quantity which will actually hold. The free market price and quantity will hold. But that means that, again, we will be producing up to 800,000 tonnes, producing and consuming up to 800,000 tonnes. And in that case, the marginal social costs, the cost to the society of the last unit, will be far greater than the benefits to the society of the last unit given by the marginal social benefit curve. And so, again, we will be, in fact, taking away from our overall economic welfare. That is, we'll be creating a deadweight loss of economic welfare due to overfishing. This is by definition an inefficient outcome.